We'll call this meeting to order at 6:00 p.m. The traditional and contemporary home of the Cree, Dene, and Métis people. We're privileged to have the opportunity to live, learn, and lead on this land, and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation. I'd also like to review our board's universal guiding principles. So for everything we decide and do, we'll hold ourselves accountable and we'll ask, is it good for students? Will it help build trust and good relationships? Will it help us improve? Is it the responsible thing to do? And are we being open, honest, and ethical? So first up, adoption of the agenda. I'm looking for any additions to the agenda. Trustee Martin?
Just a report from Education Foundation. Reports.
Under committee reports, perfect. Any other additions to the agenda? Looking for a motion to approve it then. Trustee Martin? Any discussion? All those in favor? Perfect. Okay, we had committee of the whole minutes from April 23rd, 2024. I'm looking for a motion to approve those minutes. Trustee-elect. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Perfect. And we also had regular board meeting minutes of April 23rd, 2024. Looking for a motion to approve those. Trustee Cutts. Any discussion? All in favor? Perfect. Okay. Sorry, guys. We got that stuff out of the way. So we're, I'll maybe pass it over to Superintendent McDonald tonight to introduce our presenters, which we're very excited for.
Oh, we're very excited is an understatement, I think, Chair Nellis. It's my pleasure to introduce 4 individuals from Derek Taylor Public School. We've followed for a couple of years now the planning and quite considerable amount of planning that staff put in, but a considerable amount of planning that the students put in to be able to make this trip, their trip, possible. Tonight, Mrs. Bracco is going to introduce us to 3 students who participated in the recent Derek Taylor Public School trip to the Bamfield Marine Station on Vancouver Island, and we're really quite looking forward to seeing and hearing all about it. Ladies?
Yeah, so down at the end, we have Chloe down there, and in the middle, we have Aditi, and we have Isabella here next to me. They attended the trip as well as 39 others on the trip, so it was quite a large number of students who went. Yeah. So you guys ready?
This is our presentation. First, we'll talk about what we learned. At Bamfield, we were introduced to many sea creatures and oceanic activities that allow us and our peers to further develop our knowledge about the ocean and its inhabitants. Learning about the ocean was an opportunity to expand our knowledge on how the ocean works, such as learning about how far you can see down in the ocean and how much salt is in the water and how it is affected by the climate, pollution, oceanic creatures, and human populations.
What we did in the classrooms. When we were in the classrooms, we learned about how different animal adaptations can affect how an animal can survive different disasters and how they live, eat, breathe, and where they live. To further our understanding of how adaptations work, we had an activity where we created creatures based on the marine animals we learned about, and we imagined them in different disaster situations to see if they would survive or not. This allowed us to see why some features wouldn't work in some settings.
During our Banfield trip, we did numerous activities that allowed us to enjoy and further engage our learning. A few of these activities that stood out were the beach walk, plankton lab, an interactive oceanography lab, and dredging. Throughout the beach walk, we were able to explore the sand and rocks, observing the sea creatures in their natural habitat. Along with the beach walk, we were able to gather and identify different kinds of phytoplankton and zooplankton under a microscope. As well, we went on a boat to learn how to measure different factors that affect how people map out the ocean floor, and how it affects oceanography maps.
Student learning opportunities. Banfield engaged the students in a more hands-on and interactive approach to learning. That is often unattainable in a classroom environment. This allowed us to grasp on the information that would normally take longer to comprehend. This provided multiple opportunities for students to further their understanding of the materials that were being taught. Personally, I found that the information was easier to learn when you can interact with the various types of sea life, make your own observations of the animals, and have any questions answered by professionals in the marine biology research field.
How this trip was memorable. Well, one of the main things that made Banfield memorable was the staff and how kind and patient they were to our school, and how they answered our questions with open arms. During our stay at Banfield Marine Science Center, if the staff wasn't as welcoming and interactive with the students and teachers, this trip wouldn't be as memorable as it was to everyone who went on this trip. The staff as well helped our peers to interact with our environment and the activities that we're exploring.
For our student highlights, we surveyed a few grade 7 and 8 students that were on the trip and asked them the same question of what their favorite part was, then compiled a small list of the most frequent answers. Many students enjoyed the beach walks. There were several students who enjoyed the divine food made by the lovely and tender-hearted staff at Banfield. Various students enjoyed being hailed on during their walk back to the dormitory. Tons of our peers enjoyed spending time with their friends, and great quantities of our peers were also fond of doing the dredging activities.
Thank you for viewing our presentation. We're so glad that our school was able to have this opportunity for us and our peers. We hope that for the following years, many more Derek Taylor students can go to Banfield as well.
Excellent, thank you. You guys open to answering questions if the board has questions. Does anyone have a question for the students?
Tell me about what dredging involves.
Basically, so they have like a net, like on the ship, and then they collect like different sea creatures and stuff, and they put it on board that we could go through and like find different creatures. It was really fun.
Thank you.
Other questions? Trustee Ola?
Were you the only school at one time, or was there other schools there?
No other schools.
Just yourselves?
Yeah, we got lucky. We were the only ones there.
Oh, wow, isn't that great?
So this is, everyone who applies does not necessarily get the chance to read, right? So they're fortunate to begin with the application.
Well, 30% are chosen,
Yeah.
from applications.
And how many schools would they host in a year? Do you know?
I don't believe they said, so no.
I'm not sure. It also depends, how many PhD students they have there at the time
Right.
and how many researchers, So,
Trustee Martin?
This is the first time you applied, or have you applied before, or this is the first time you?
No, it was the first time.
Okay.
When I applied, I honestly had no plan. So I just.
But I said you did.
Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. No, just because first you have to get accepted, right? And then the plan will. Yeah, the plan all came into place. This presentation that these guys did, I did not help at all. It was all 100% them. So I'm really proud of them, yeah.
I was just wondering if one of you can tell me why trips like this are important to keep doing.
These kind of trips are important to keep doing because it could, like, say there's a kid that doesn't know what they want to do, or like it could explore something like a new interest and stuff, or a kid that has trouble learning, they start doing like these other things and they realize, oh, like I can finally learn this way and it's so much better.
That's a good point, the different opportunities for different people. How many of you guys came back wanting to be marine biologists?
Did you learn anything about ocean temperatures or anything like that? Did they talk about that?
Yeah, we actually got to measure that in our oceanography maps.
Yeah.
We did that as well as turbidity, salinity, and
What was the second one? Turbidity and
salinity.
salinity. Very cool. What about tides? Did you learn anything about tides?
Like a tiny bit, we talked a bit about how it affects like what creatures live where and like where they go around to.
Interesting.
That's great. Thank you guys very much for
No.
coming in. We've been following along. I was there when your principal kind of threw it out to the parents, like, hey, do you guys want to do this? And it turned into something really amazing. So to your principal, thank you for making this opportunity available to students. That's really great.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. And I mean, thank you to the central office too for my million phone calls, especially Norm. He put up with me with all the insurance stuff and everything, so I appreciate that.
Well, and to your colleagues, students, and your parents as well.
Yeah, and our parents for the amount of work they
A lot of
did
work went into
in
that.
raising money was unbelievable. Yeah. Our kids. Yeah,
That's great. That's a great opportunity. Thank you very much.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Both of
much.
you. owned it.
See?
Not so bad, right?
You can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are more than welcome to stay.
It'll be lonely. Don't forget. See you later. I'll see you soon.
Well done. Well done.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I did have an online version.
On behalf of the board, I would also like to acknowledge that we had the death of Bernardo Batista from our maintenance team who passed away recently. Bernardo has been with the division since 2000 and worked in a few of our sites, most recently at central office here. He was an excellent employee and a very good friend to many. And our thoughts and prayers are with his wife, Clarissa, and their family during this time. I just wanted to point that out before I went into my official report.
Thank you.
So board chair report. So our board and the division leadership team met on May 1st for a day of learning. It heard an update from the directors on the work plan, and that helps our board with the assurance that we're able to have when we're listening and checking things off our box. We're also able to have our first look at budget development as well as the development of the education plan. I wanted to share that the reason we first discussed these topics in a workshop setting was to help build understanding. Just to help build the understanding of those watching and listening, is workshop setting allows the board to discuss and build understanding on those topics in more detail. We're able to engage in open dialogue, brainstorming, with the purpose of building understanding. So both of these items are on our agenda tonight for public debate, and the workshop setting helped our board build that understanding that we need to have that debate. So overall, the planning day was extremely useful, and thanks to administration for all their efforts in planning for that day. I really appreciate it. Looking to my colleagues, is there anything I missed from that day? No? Okay. Then we'll move into the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Nellis. All my report is submitted for information, so trustees have had a chance to review it, but I just want to highlight a few key things before we get to some of the more action items. There's a theme this time of year. As we enter May and June, we're wrapping up a lot of processes, and one of the themes is expression of appreciation for the efforts and for the ongoing work that our staff do to support student learning in the division. Our division mentorship program is wrapping up. We've just had the last couple of meetings, and the wrap-up session will be at the end of April, at the end on May 30th. But we've had a number of first-year teachers working all year with mentor teachers and more experienced teachers from within the division. Supported by Rhonda Schneider from the ATA local and Mrs. Cruz from our office, and a representative from Alberta Teachers Association, Barnett House. And that collaborative project to support the orientation and the initial support for beginning teachers is really critically important. I'm quite grateful to everybody who made that happen. Also appreciation in there for Principal Matt Pepper, the staff, and the students at Isabel Campbell Public School for being recognized as one of the top, the third most significant fundraiser for this year's Terry Fox Run at their grade level.
And of note, it was also their first year ever doing it. They'd never done it before, and they raised the third most money.
Yeah, tremendous opportunity for students to help lead our community. Recognize two new administrators in the division. Kim Karen is leaving her current division and moving over to be a vice principal at Isabel Campbell School next year. And Liz Linfield is also working currently in another division and is coming over to work for the Peace Collaborative Services team in the role of regional manager next year. So we're welcome to join, welcome those leaders to our division. We also had Swan City Rotary Club's Excellence in Education Awards recently, and a number of our staff listed in my report were acknowledged for their efforts. Staff and parents as well, and so it's really nice to see everybody's contributions being recognized. Moving on from the theme of appreciation to just the general information, there's some information in my report about the new draft kindergarten to grade 6 social studies curriculum. And we've had a lot of information and a lot of opportunities this year as trustees and administration and teaching staff to participate in a variety of different online events to learn more about the draft curriculum. And we're just in the process of kind of identifying any volunteers who might like to pilot some or all of the curriculum next year. And so our principals are working with their teachers to try to answer questions as best we can and to see who would like to participate, similar to how we've done in previous curricular subject areas as they were rolled out. And what else? I think that was everything I had there. Oh, the last one I wanted to mention was appreciation to the Parkside Montessori School Council. Around this time last year, we received a presentation from their school council saying, hey, we love our school and we love our Montessori programming, and we'd love if we could see it extend to grades 7 and 8. And as the board is aware through the capital planning process, we don't have much opportunity to influence the decisions that are made, but we had to pick some priorities and include them in our capital plan, and we did. We made the commitment last spring to go back to Montessori, the Parkside Montessori parents, and give them an update. So that was the intent of my recent visit last week, was to provide them that update, but also to make the commitment that while the solution to a solution to expand the grades to 7 and 8, Montessori programming to grades 7 and 8 was not in our capital plan. It is something that we continue to look for a way to potentially accommodate if we can, if it can make business sense and if it can make physical sense in terms of supporting the students staying. So that's something that we'll be working on between now and the end of the year and into next year as well. And we'll keep the board apprised in that as we try to find a creative solution to be able to support the needs of the school community. And at this point, before we get into the 3-year education plan review, I'll take any questions that might be out there.
I was wondering if you had any sense as to how the update was received from the Parkside Montessori families?
I felt it was received quite well. It was one of their smaller school council meetings. And so there was not a room full of parents there, but of the parents who were there, the 2 of them expressed appreciation for keeping them in the loop, that sort of thing, and for continuing to work towards trying to find a creative solution.
Fair.
I saw lots of flexibility with the school council when they came last year in their presentation, and kind of made a commitment that we're going to try to approach solving this request with a similar creative background. Well,
Just around the elementary report card update, just with regards to the stakeholders or people that are involved. How many parents are involved, or are you seeking parents, or are you?
Oh, they surveyed, I think, all parents,
Okay.
and we had hundreds of parents provided
And what was
responses.
the general feedback? Like, was there a general theme of feedback that was missing they wanted, or are we kind of?
I can't speak to any specifics. I wasn't part of the review.
Okay.
But I believe one of the approach behind the theory behind approaching parents was the report cards exist not for teachers or school, but for parents. And so what do you value most? And one of the changes that's being made in the new report card is an opportunity for more specific comments. Rather than a general comment about how students are doing, specific comments about each subject areas as appropriate. So more opportunities in that regard.
Okay.
I would say that was one of the big pieces that came out of that.
If I could follow up with a question on that too. I had 2 questions. One is what's the main difference between the old report cards and the new? Understanding it's completely different, and why the change to 3 a year? Currently it's 4, correct? Or
No, it's 3.
It's 3. Okay.
It's 3.
So then just the first question.
Yeah. Although we have had discussion about whether it should be 2. The biggest change is the change in the learner outcomes. So the content of what is being reported on is different as the curriculum has changed. The second biggest change is providing increased clarity about students' competencies, which, the things that we used to refer to as work habits and personal characteristics and those things are being described a little more explicitly on the report card, separated completely out of the curricular outcomes piece and reported on individually. That would be my take on the biggest change.
And currently our report cards for that age group would be lettered.
Numbered.
Numbered, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, right. So
I'm going to continue with
going
that.
to be continued with the number.
The second, I think I've talked about 2 already. The other biggest change that's represented in my report is the implementation plan will be really explicitly laid out. This is how we're going to implement it. And a parent-friendly resource will be created before this year is out that can be shared early in the next year. So parents will, long before the report card comes, they'll get a document that says, when your child has a report card. This is what it will look like. This is what it tells you. This is, these are questions you can ask, that sort of interpretive document to support the effectiveness of it. The biggest change that's not related to the actual product, however, is the product of the work of the many teachers and administrators who went through the report card, who went through the learning outcomes, who went through the research on reporting, who grappled with concepts about how to best report specific information, and the knowledge they've built as a cohort and that they've now taken back to their schools and are informing their schools' assessment planning. That's, report cards are something that happen in November, March, and end of the year, and as teachers, we just look forward to the work that goes into doing that. But as parents, we look forward to learning more about how our children are doing. And so the product of that work influences what happens between the report cards, between the start of school and the first reporting period, during the month in between November and March, when that second reporting period is in full swing. It's influencing the feedback students will receive about their learning. The product of that work will influence the formative assessment that gets reported home to parents in between, right? And so on the whole, we just expect that the assessment practices are now at a higher level as a result of this excellent work that our staff were engaged in.
Any other questions on the rest of his report besides the head plan? Still yours.
Still mine. Okay, so it's listed in items for action, but really it's for information and any questions or comments or observations you might have. This current school year that we're in is the third year of our existing 3-year education plan. And for the last 2 cycles, we've really, as a division, attempted to be more efficient with our planning and the use or implementation of those plans, so that we can kind of make maximize the effectiveness of our resource allocation. So in other words, we're trying to be more deliberate and specific in what priorities we establish, base them on evidence that exists of how students are doing in the school division, and evidence that exists of the supports that our staff need to be able to meet student needs, and things like new curriculum and the ripple effects coming out of the pandemic and those sorts of things. Trying to be more deliberate about all of that. And this 3-year plan kind of guides, it's both built by the needs that are identified at the schools, but it also kind of guides the planning they do at the schools, in each school's 3-year education plan. And so the original 3 priorities in our 3-year education plan were identified based on the needs that our schools identified. You'll see that those remain the same. While we don't say one priority is more important than the other, they do, kind of have to go on kind of subsequent pages. So in the 3-year education plan draft that you're looking at now, you'll see that the order is teaching and learning, then inclusion, then leadership. And again, it's not that one is more important than the other. For them to be in our plan, all 3 are important. But we just felt that the flow of the plan as you read through the strategies makes a little more sense when we have them in that order. So you've had a chance to review the plan. We did talk about it in committee, and you had a chance to be introduced to it then. And you had a chance in preparing for tonight's meeting to look at it again. I just want to, rather than go through it in its entirety, highlight a few things that are represented specifically in this plan. And I'll go back to the page where I made those notes. So the format is similar, but you'll see some key differences. The first difference I've already identified is the order of those 3 priority areas. The second difference you'll see is the level of specificity in the specific outcomes we're seeking to accomplish for students in each of those 3 priority areas. This plan is an extension of the previous plan. It's not a replacement. The work that our staff and our schools have been immersed in with their students for the last 3 years is continuing. But you'll see in those outcomes that we're seeking deeper, stronger, more extensions of the outcomes that we had identified previously. And we're ready to make that next leap. And examples of that, we've always had as one of our primary outcomes, increasing our high school completion rates. You know, that's one of the key measures of the success of our students is high school completion rate. That remains in this plan, but we're also being more specific about our career readiness and preparing our students for whatever opportunities lay for outside of high school, beyond high school for them. And that includes, you know, preparation for the workforce, preparation for post-secondary. So you'll see a lot of examples in the outcomes that are deeper in similar fashion. You'll also see a number of reference to more specific strategies with respect to the growth and achievement of our students. In academics, we're making explicit connections to the pedagogy of our teachers, to the assessment practices of our staff, and we talked a little bit about that earlier in my report on the elementary report card update. But you'll also see the reference to the literacy frameworks, the numeracy frameworks, the Indigenous programming frameworks, which will introduce a new focus on culturally relevant pedagogy, the adoption of culturally relevant teaching practices to connect for all students, and a wellness framework that has more than just a concept, will now have more specific measures. You'll see those measures and those strategies reflected a little bit differently in the plan as well, because we want this plan to be parent friendly. So rather than having all of the specifics of everything we're going to do, we want our parents and others in our community who may look at this plan to be able to understand it at a conceptual, higher level, and know that we have deeper plans for everything that's in here. And then our trustees are aware of our department planning processes and our school planning processes. And that planning extends all the way down to the individual classroom level. What I really wanted to highlight was, I know I referenced this when we talked about the elementary report card as well, but the implementation plan that you see on page 7. Over the last several years, we've started to be more deliberate about how we close the loop when we're collecting or sharing information with parents. And by closing the loop, I mean talk about, here's what we're going to do. And to close the loop, here's how you're going to know. Here's some evidence you can watch for. And here's how we're going to do it. And here's how we're going to follow up with you. So this implementation plan, we've always had this concept of describing how we take the plan and move it from paper to action. We're a little more explicit in this update. And it addresses some of our assurance planning and things like that. Really makes visible that a core strategy for us is our focus on professional learning for teachers and administrators and our non-instructional staff. You know, for every student to succeed, every staff member has to succeed. And that commitment to professional learning, a focused commitment that aligns with the outcomes and the evidence in this plan is really built, like it's driven by that professional learning. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight in this, and not that it's something new, but it's worth highlighting, is whenever I get an opportunity to speak to anybody about the work we do in our division, I make reference to the fact that the one thing we want people to see in our actions, in our behaviors as teachers and teacher leaders, is a deliberateness. And none of and it's, I believe, very evident in this draft new 3-year education plan, that none of what is included in here is arbitrary or ad hoc. The priorities are established because we've got multiple different sources of evidence that we have to focus on: teaching and leading and inclusion, and all of the specific things that are identified in here. And so we're quite excited to present this to the board this evening. I will do my best to answer any questions, given that the authors of this plan, none of the 5 authors of this plan are in the room, except for Mr. Gandon and myself, but I feel quite confident that we can speak to that. And look forward at the end of the month, hopefully, to having this adopted by the board as our new plan and our new roadmap for the next 3 school years.
Do you have any questions for clarification or suggestions or anything like that coming out of this? I was wondering, as a note, I really loved the new and intentional wording around intercultural understanding in priority 2. Our division is absolutely a reflection of how Grand Prairie has changed, and it's great to see, we see that in the schools, and it's great to see it as a focus here. So I thought that was great that we're embracing that and looking to, and having the wording chosen to increase and enhance that understanding. I thought that was great. In the last plan, there was some specific language in the inclusion priority around supports for students with specialized learning needs.
Right.
And knowing that work is still being done in the division, and some of it's referenced in priority 1 now, and I actually kind of like that it's for all students. Can you speak to the change in wording of this priority?
You just did. You just nailed the exact reason why that change was made. We had specialized learner supports in the inclusion priority before, and it fits there. The term inclusion is used quite commonly to identify needing to provide differentiated supports to students based on their needs. But over the last 3 years, we talked a lot about that inclusion goal does not just refer to special education needs that exist in our division. It refers to a bigger mindset about belonging and supporting all needs. And so the biggest reason that you don't see any of that language in the inclusion priority and priority 2 in this draft is because it has been adopted into both of the other 2 priority areas. And we're going to be talking about supports for learner supports in the budget section later this evening. We'll get a chance to talk about that, but from a high-level planning perspective, the optimum learning framework really makes reference to the professional practice standards that teachers, administrators, and superintendents are held to. And the goal of each one of those practice standards guiding the behaviors of teachers, teacher leaders, and superintendents is to provide optimum learning for all students. And that optimum learning means that we have to be thinking about that all the time. It has to be found, it has to be visible in our 3-year ed plans, it has to be visible in our department work plans, school plans, all the way down to the teacher plans. So you heard a little bit about what schools are doing and how schools have evolved over the course of this last 3 years during this year's assurance meetings. You will hear and see much more evidence of that in next year's assurance meetings and in their schools' 3-year ed plans. In the fall, when those are submitted, as they talk about responsive planning, and that responsive planning is an approach to be able to identify A, what does every student need, and B, how are we going to do that? Who are we going to work to do with that? What resource, who are we going to work with to accomplish those goals? What resources do we need? And it's kind of a strategic approach to that. So that's the biggest rationale for it not being explicitly in the inclusion goal. It is embedded in all of the goals.
I appreciate your answer, and I mean, I've seen the intentionality of it through evidence over the last year, but I'm wondering, you know, you talked about this being a parent document as well. I mean, it's an internal document, it's an Alberta Ed document, but also parent document. Thinking about it from that perspective, do you think a parent would read this and feel like we're maybe not doing as much or implicitly as much for specialized learning plans as we had been in the past? Hard to like guess what people
think, you know, I'm thinking that's a question that I'm going to take back to the team and ask them to take a look at. I'm looking at the implementation plan, right, where we talk about the use of evidence and the alignment of planning, the resourcing of our system. I'm looking at things like that and wondering if we can be, if that's enough. So,
like I said, I understand that it's implicit and built into things, but if you're a parent, you don't know those things. Well,
It doesn't say it specifically.
well, yeah, it's not.
well,
It's not a bullet point like it was a bullet point.
it says it explicitly in other places, but not in one.
Mhm.
You know, the point is a valid one, and I appreciate it, and I will address that when we come back with a revision May 28th.
The only other thing I was wondering, and I was wondering if the inclusion is the right title for priority 2. And I know I kind of asked that or thought it out loud during our workshop. And then we didn't have any discussion on it because we thought it was probably a better topic for a board meeting, so we stopped that. But like, do we think inclusion is the right name, or should it be inclusion and equity, or as the traditional understanding of inclusion is a little bit different than what
We've been grappling with that for some time ourselves, and we did bring it up at the workshop, and we've had that a number of different iterations. We kept coming back to inclusion just because there was none of the other kind of ands that we could add we felt were appropriately. So inclusion and equity. Well, we believe equity is embedded as well. When we stuck with it, inclusion, because it was familiar, and it's less about the title and more about the outcomes in that is our approach. But I'll add that question as well.
I don't know, have thoughts on the framing of that? Not really?
Yes, you do.
No?
Yeah. So it would be nice to have like priority to inclusion and another word of some kind to balance it out more.
Do you have any suggestions?
I wasn't prepared to have a suggestion, but as I was thinking about it, what about like inclusion and belonging? I don't know.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just looking for a list of some of the ones we've debated.
Debated, yeah. Well, I'm sure that there's been a lot of people rolling this around, so.
And just on the, under measures, to the right-hand side.
Priority what?
All of them,
Oh.
just, so we have Alberta education assurance measures, and then we have local measures. And we have Grand Prairie Public School Division measures.
Those are the local measures. Those are our measures.
Okay,
So that-
but we don't want to put in,
No, because the assurance framework explicitly asks you to identify Alberta education measures and local measures. So we just went consistent with their expectations.
I like that the measures are broken out to the side as well. I think it reads a lot
It
easier.
does. And the other thing is they're not explicit in here which measures. We're telling where the measures are going to come from. You will actually see the specific measures in the results report where we will identify specific, some of the 16 measures out of the provincial report, some of the ones out of the local one.
Anyone else have any questions or thoughts or considerations on the ed plan? Again, it's going to be coming back for approval. We have to have it approved by the end of May, so it's going to be coming back on the 28th. But understandably, if there's changes, it is something that we should really suggest now so that the changes can be presented.
I still like the Grand Prairie.
Yeah,
Public School Division
I know.
Local measures. So local measures, when local is the other divisions in the area. If I'm reading this as a parent,
Okay.
but if we have Grand Prairie Public School Division local measures, just thought on it.
Any other questions? Anything you want to close with then, Superintendent McDonald?
No, I appreciate the discussion. I want to thank Director of System Planning, Mrs. Frickus, for her work and the support that she's received from Associate Superintendent Gandon, Deputy Superintendent Robinson, and all of our other directors, Director of Student Supports, Paul Tarian, Director of Inclusive Learning, Nancy Gorgachuk, and Director of Teaching and Learning, Kareem Cruz. All of those individuals and school administrators have weighed in on updating this. You see the product that is an end result of close to 5 months of work, kind of looking for ways to improve not just the product itself, but the outcome itself. And that's what's most important to us. So I do appreciate this. We'll go back to the expectations for wording and things like that. Trustee Olet, they're in the funding manual. That's where we said you have to have these things, and that's the boxes that Alberta Education checks off. I don't know that we'll be able to do anything with respect to that, but we might be able to highlight it elsewhere in our plan that these are division-specific measures. And to give some thought to how we can improve clarity about that second priority, and both in terms of why the outcomes look a little bit different, but also maybe an opportunity to improve the heading. So it's a little more.
I think the outcomes are great.
But the clarity of why they're different.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have a draw for anybody who can identify why they're different. We get lots of, we track the downloads.
Yeah,
Probably,
for sure.
I probably have most of them.
Yeah,
The lines will be burning up.
that's great.
But it goes up every year. And we'll talk about that coming up too when we get to the TTLC.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thanks very much, everyone. That's my report.
Thank you. Trustee Johnson, Advocacy and Engagement Committee meeting of today.
Absolutely. We had our meeting here today. So our biggest priority right now is planning for an update next year for our advocacy and engagement priority list. as we've talked about at previous meetings here. So there's kind of two prongs that we worked on that today. Number one, performing a review of our current priorities and doing a bit of a review of actions that were performed since 22-23 when they were kind of established there, to see how they align with our current priorities, make sure that everything is still relevant and that it kind of matches the actual actions that we've taken. And then secondly, looking at getting some blind feedback from stakeholders in the division, parents, teachers, and even students from grades 7 to 12 for what they think our most significant priorities should be. So the administration has put together a thought exchange that will be sent out there so that we can solicit some feedback and sort of see where the thinking of other groups in the division would potentially line up with our own. So as we talked about, I think at the last board meeting, we would be looking to probably have some sort of update to our priorities for the fall, if I remember correctly, for the start of next school year. After that, talked about some possible updates to our board meeting agendas as per some of the discussion at the strategic plan workshop, which might include some things like the addition of board governance minute to each meeting, possibly the addition of some sort of explicit review or at least discussion surrounding one of our board policies at each meeting to make that a little bit more visible, and also possibly an update to the structure of the agenda itself, the organization of it. So administration's putting together a few ideas for what that could look like, and we'll have something to review at our next advocacy and engagement meeting in June. We'd expect to have some discussion probably at the board meeting in August on this, but we all agreed earlier today that we certainly don't want to rush into any kind of big structural change to our agenda. So there will be plenty of opportunity for discussion for it. And in tandem with that, administration is also putting together a concept for what a board governance framework could look like, as we had discussed previously, which is, I understand, a little bit hard to visualize without a draft right in front of you. But it would essentially be a single document that summarizes kind of the different things that the board does, what governance entails as far as the structure of the board, how it aligns with, I guess, the specific things that are laid out in legislation, and also talking about things like timelines and key dates, and kind of like a one-stop shop for governance, you might say. So we would hopefully have something as well to look at for that, either for the end of this school year or for the board meeting in August with the draft that they're putting together on it. The next item that I would probably bring up is going to be the ASBA budget bulletin, which is going to be for the ASBA budget, which is going to be approved at their SGM coming up. So we're going to be asking for an in-camera session at the May 28th board meeting to review and discuss the budget. So please watch their video and come ready to discuss it on the 28th. And we'll also be aiming to have a meeting by teams to discuss their resolutions once they're released prior to the SGM. The last thing that I would just bring up is talking about new advocacy actions. We also wanted to suggest that we may want to reach out to our local MLAs to raise some awareness about the level of inflation that we're seeing across virtually all services after the budget's passed. So there will be more to come on that for discussion, but it could be a good opportunity to raise some awareness with them about increased budget pressures that we're facing, and as part of our advocacy action to see if there's anything that, any kind of progress that we might be able to make on that. That's pretty much everything that I had. I don't know if I missed anything. Trustee Nellis or Charles or.
Nope, you nailed it, I think. Good job.
Trustee Cook?
I just wondered whether or not we could sort of add to that in-camera discussion, maybe the PSBA
Resolutions?
resolutions, but in addition to that, also the 5%, potential 5% increase to fees as well.
That's a good
That
idea.
will be discussed also at SGM.
If there's, it might be a bit more than an hour then, which isn't the end of the world because the timing is really good. But if there's documents that go along with that, it would be helpful to have those. Are there any resolutions at the PSBA?
No, but there is some budget.
The
information
budget
you could
for
share. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so we need to do PSBA and ASBA budget, which, if we come prepared to watch the video beforehand, we've discussed it at Zone a few times, but our board as a whole hasn't discussed it, which is why we thought it might make sense to do it that way. And then so far, there's one resolution for ASBA, but there probably will be more, but we won't have those until closer to, so that's why those teams meetings closer to would probably be more effective, but if we're just looking at those two budgets, I think we could probably do them both in an hour if everyone comes prepared with their questions and thoughts on it. Does that seem?
That's for the next meeting?
Yeah.
I'll make that work.
We could,
Sound like plan?
I know we have the ASBA. I don't think I've seen anything for the PSBA. But I was thinking that we could provide a high-level summary of, take a look at it, see if we can provide a high-level summary or maybe some guiding questions to help facilitate a structured conversation.
Sure, yeah, we could do that. But yeah, I don't know that I've seen the PSBA one either.
Just, they're just talking about it. There hasn't been anything presented that I've seen. So.
I think it will be presented though at the AGM, but I can follow up with.
Yeah, maybe see if they have something that gets released in advance.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could email as well.
Yeah, I can do that extra.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, are you thinking Teams meeting or an hour prior to the May 28th meeting?
No, I don't think we'll have them by May 28th,
No.
the resolutions. Oh, sorry, for the budget, yes. Yeah,
What was it, prior?
sorry, the May 28th meeting, we'll do a committee of the whole before a board meeting to do their budgets, because we have to do them in camera because they're not public documents and we can't discuss them in that forum. So we can do that before our next board meeting. And then later that week, we'll have to do
We can have a committee meeting by Teams.
a committee meeting by teams. Maybe we could identify a time right now and throw it in a hold, because otherwise it'll be hard to.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Donna, Trustee Cook, you're the first one to fly out, I assume. What day does your PSBA start?
It starts on
Thursday?
Yeah, I think the afternoon,
Third.
evening of the Thursday, the 30th.
Evening of the 30th.
That's when check-in is anyway.
There's the dinner, it's the annual dinner or whatever on that night.
On the 30th?
Yeah, but before then is fine.
Well, we could even do it later in the afternoon so that we know you'd be in, who else? Superintendent McDonald, you're going to, but
Or even Friday morning is fine, 31st.
Yeah, I haven't
Friday
decided on getting there yet.
okay.
31st is fine.
Does anyone have, actually my 31st is pretty open too. Does anyone have a specific time on the 31st that they could not do or could do?
Want to do early morning?
I can do between 7 and 9. I'm good.
AM?
So on the,
31st.
Yeah, I'm in a pack. I'm good at packing.
31st, the day, yeah.
So what time does your thing start, Donna?
Well, 9 is fine.
9?
is fine.
Yeah,
9 a.m.
9 a.m. We do a Teams on the 31st at 9 a.m. And Mrs. Breslin, ever the organizer, just reminded me that we can't have a committee of the whole on the 28th because we have the student advisory coming in
Oh,
before our board meeting.
That's right, we do. Thank you.
Are they coming in an hour before?
They are, but they also can, because the intent of that is to prepare for their presentation to the
Yeah.
board, and Mrs. Frickus could lead them through that.
Oh, okay, so
We could still,
we could go over there or whatever.
or they could go over there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
after two.
Would it make sense just to do it after, especially if you're concerned it might not fit into an hour?
Now that I remember, it's just 2 budgets, it probably will. Either one.
I'm good at after 2, so whatever works.
Which would you prefer?
Oh, I think if we have a 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Before, a little more respectful of people's time.
Sounds good.
For sure, meetings.
Okay, so we'll do that. Yeah. All right. Thanks for all that. Any other questions for Trustee Johnson? All right. Okay. Best part of the meeting, business services.
Thanks, Chair Nellis. Just bear with me as I get my supplementary information ready, keyed up here. I've got, so in your package, you had a report for the draft budget with the highlights of changes from the current budget. And I've got a presentation here to supplement that here this evening. All right, so we'll start by, we're going to start by recapping the financial position of the board when it was updated last during the fall budget update for the 23-24 school year. So I got presented here the picture of what it was, or the outcome at that time. So we had projected a deficit or a budgeted deficit of 2.4 million roughly for this year. And part of that exercise was our standard projection outlook for year 2 and 3, which encompasses the budget year that we're working on currently. So at that time, the projected deficit for year 2, which would have been the 24-25 school year, was at 3 million in regards to the deficit. So it was 111.5 million in revenue, projected revenues, with 114.6 million in expenditures. And in the third year, we were projecting a $1 million deficit. So that was part of the financial plan that's been approved by the Minister of Education to work the accumulated surplus from operations built up over COVID times by the division under the cap implemented by the provincial government a couple of years ago. So what does that look like going forward? Actually, just at the end, to recap, at the end of that 3-year, we were going to be under that 3.2% accumulated surplus from operations of 3.2%, which is the cap until the recent changes. That was the cap that was implemented by the provincial government. So we were going to be underneath that cap at the end of the 3 years, which was the conclusion of the 25-26 school year. So that was the outcome or the financial outlook after the fall update from November of 2023. Now, moving to the process that we're undergoing currently is the budget for the preparation of the budget for 24-25, which we've got the draft to present to the board tonight. So this is a process that started earlier on with the submission of our enrollment projections to the government at the beginning of January of this year. And we will conclude at the end of May when we submit, or the board approves at the meeting of the 28th, the final budget for submission to the government. So I'm going to review the highlights of the significant changes from the fall budget. So all the numbers that I'm presenting today are in comparison to the fall budget. So not the spring budget that's published when we do our financial statements, but the fall budget. So keep that in mind. So to recap some of the past discussions we've had after the provincial budget was released, as you recall, there was no increases in grant rates. The increase in revenue that we're experiencing for next year is as a direct result of the enrollment growth that we projected, which was 3% for this coming year. So on the screen today, you have the net change from the fall 2023-24 budget to the proposed draft budget for next year. So we've got an increase of approximately 3.9 million. And I just want to point out, I'm working with the most current numbers. So I know your report that was presented in the package has one slight difference there. There was a change made since we prepared the report. Not a large change. It's change on equal value of the revenue side and the expenditure side. So there's no overall change to the overall deficit, but it's just to recognize a secondment position that is for our staff that's seconded with the government. So we've got that reflected here. So it's a bit of a change there, but no overall impact on the overall deficit that's presented. So the overall increase in revenue from the current budget is 3.9 million. And you can see the majority of that is driven from Alberta education funding, but 3.4 million, which is strictly generated by an increase of 3% in enrollment. for next year. There's no, there is going to be targeted grants that the government announces over time, such as the curriculum implementation and some mental health, grants that they announced. But in terms of base funding and all our standard grants from the framework, there's no new grants there, and the grant rates remain the same for this coming year. So the 3.4 million that you see there is based on the enrollment growth. And for the next largest item that you see on the summary of revenue increases is a line called the federal government. What we have currently is the federal government has a program under the Indigenous Services called the Jordan's Principle, where they provide funding to support Indigenous students who need some supports in the schools for various reasons. And so families can apply for that funding to the department, this federal department. And once they get that funding, then they work with the school division to utilize that in various ways. And the majority of the time it's providing an educational assistant with the student in the school. So that was kind of an indirect way of getting that funding. New for next year is this department actually approached us and suggested that we do a funding commitment with the division, or they do a funding commitment with the division directly, instead of having families applying it on an individual basis, which was what was occurring right now. Is a very inefficient way and very time consuming. So this way it's all under one envelope. So that's the reason why now it's shown as funding in our budget for next year. We have that happening this year, but we've never budgeted it in our actual division budget, because it's never something that we knew what that amount was, and it wasn't a commitment directly with the division, it was indirect. Now that's showing up here as a revenue line in our budget because of the new framework or the new structure of this, how we're going to get this funding. So our director of inclusion does work with this division and the families to make sure that we've identified what the needs are, and then an application is made for approval on behalf of the division for all these students that have been identified, and we've got a submission in for approval for that. That amount might change going forward, but what's in the budget right now is for 34 educational assistants funded from this federal money. So that's what you see on the summary of revenue changes here. So that's an increase of what we would have budgeted this current year in terms of revenue. So those are the two largest items, and when it comes to the increase in revenue, that accounts for a large portion. Then you see some decreases in revenue there, and that's just adjusting for the position of where some of the grants or the program will be for next year. So implementation grants, there's a decrease from this current year, so that's why you see that decrease of 400,000. Mental health addictions grant, that's a pilot, and that's entering the second year, so that's just adjusting what's anticipated to be for revenue for next year. And then some smaller items adjusting there to the overall increase of 3.9 million in revenue. So that's roughly 3.5% increase in revenues compared to the current year. Of note of here is, you'll see that throughout the presentation, is the government has made no changes in regards to funding inflationary pressures that divisions or jurisdictions are experiencing across the province. And you'll see the impact of that as we go through the report today on how that will affect future years, the current budget year, plus looking forward in year 2 and 3, if the current funding levels are maintained and the same approach is taken in regards of funding enrollment growth and no changes to the grant rates. I'll pause here if there's any questions on the revenue side from any members of the board.
Just in the past, have they provided funding for inflationary before, like past governments and stuff? Like, what's the history around that? Is it always you're on your own?
The grants rates changed when they've implemented the new funding framework back in how many years now? 4 or 5 years now. We're working with 19. Yeah, so they changed grant rates at that point, but there's been tweaks here and there, and then there was all the special considerations made during COVID, but there's never been a wholesale change in all the grant rates across the board since then. And you'll see
in summary, any increases have been targeted for specific purposes, but no universal general operational.
Yeah, so there's no say, okay, we'll increase all the grant rates by 2% this year because everything's going. There's never been that structure in place, not under the current framework. So then let's shift to the expenditure changes from the current budget year. So again, you'll see that the largest, we're dealing with staff costs on the summary that we have in front of you right now. So the majority of the increases that we'll see relate to staff, and that aligns with the budget priorities or the guiding principles from the board, which is to target funding as much as possible to frontline support, frontline staff that work with our students directly. So you see that in the list here, the largest and the first on the list is our certificated staffing, so teachers in that regards. So we've got an increase of $2.2 million in strict staffing positions when it comes to teachers. And of that 19.9, essentially 20 full-time equivalent teachers, 18 of those are classroom teachers. So we've got a breakdown, and you'll see that later, is we've got classroom teachers and we've got teachers who do a broader role in terms of the school settings, and then we've got teachers at the central level, at central office and such. So these here, the total is 20, and of the 20, 18 are classroom teachers. So you can see again, the majority of the increases directly into classrooms. Next, then we've got in this list here, you've got about $1.6 million of staff-related costs. And what I mean by staff-related costs, it relates to the group health plans, and then as well as changes in positions. We've got in the fourth line here, we've got educational assistants who transition to permanent contracts, which has a different cost structure. So we've got those that happen every year, so that we've got the impact there. And then we've also got compensation adjustments, particularly here for non-instructional. One of the key assumptions that is included in the budget for next year is a continuation of the approach the government has had when it comes to compensation, which is that they've supported teacher collective bargaining increases with additional increases into budget to jurisdictions. However, on the support side or the non-instructional side, divisions have had to find that in their dollars without additional funding. So essentially reprioritizing items in the budget to account for those increases. So we've maintained that assumption in here, and to not cause further stress down the line. If we make the assumption that it's funded and it's not, then that a mid-year adjustment would be quite disruptive and quite stressful for the system to do that. So this approach here is a conservative approach, yes, and it also leads to a less stressful adjustment if something changes here. It's actually to the betterment if the government does announce this next round, if they actually will fund non-instructional staff, then that would actually be an improvement to the budget and would give flexibility to the administration to act accordingly in terms of utilizing those funds that were not anticipated. So that's one of the key things I wanted to highlight here. And then the biggest takeaway from here as well is on the staffing costs, group health plans. We're not unique in this regards. It's across the entire industry when it comes to health costs for a variety of reasons, for inflationary costs and just for utilization of those types of plans. We want our employees to use those because it has great supports when it comes to physical illness, but also well-being, mental health supports and such. So that's one of the things that we really faced as a division in the last year or so, is significant increases in our group health plans. Like we're talking over in excess of $1 million in regards to both the plan for the instructional and the non-instructional staff. And then we've got the other large staffing increase, which I've talked about on the other flip side, was the revenue. So now you see at the very bottom here, those 34 educational assistants funded by Jordan's principals. So that's an in and out. We hired staff that's funded by that federal funding. So that's the equivalent. So you see here a summary of about close to $5 million in increases in costs, all staff related when it comes to the change from the current structure and offerings that we provide as a school division to what's proposed in the budget for next year. I'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
I did have one, and my excuse is I can't quite sort of read, but you were talking about sort of the 20 FTEs. Are those net new?
Yes,
those are net
that's
new.
above you. I have a historical summary and showing where we're going, and that's additional teachers. And One of the reasons it's 20 is, if you don't recall that for this current budget, we actually had transitioned some FTE that was initially allocated for teachers to educational assistants for various reasons in terms of the needs in the classroom. So with this budget next year, those educational assistant positions are removed and we've now fully staffed again with all teachers. So that's included in there to get to our overall metric that we've been utilizing as a division on a top level is about 22.7 students per certificated staff is what we target. And that's getting us to that point.
So that addition of the 18 to classrooms is on top of we had the number of teachers we have this year, and then the teachers that we were unable to hire due to shortage that we had for the current year. We had educational assistants supporting. Those have been converted back to teachers, and then it's 18 more on top of that.
No, that's included in this.
That's included in the 18.
Yeah. That's overall, that's a straight comparison across of how many teachers we have today or how much we had budgeted, I should say, because that always changes in the year, but what we had budgeted in November to what's in the budget for next. Thank you.
Just to be clear, we're getting around 3.7, 3.78 more in revenue. And our expenses in staff-related costs alone is an extra 4.97. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
1.1 of that being the Jordan's principal.
Yes, yeah.
No, that was in and out.
But yeah,
It's
it
funded.
is.
It's funded, but it was taken out of that 4.92.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's my question for now.
Wasn't it included in this 4.9 right now, 1.1?
Yes, it is.
It's included.
And it was included in the revenue as well.
The revenue and the expense.
So then moving on to the other budget areas, in the specialized learning supports area, we've got some small changes there, nothing significant. The largest change there is part of the, and in my notes, in the notes of the report that you have, the part of the increases in the certificated staff included increases in their learning support teachers from this current year number. So as a result of that, just some additional costs to support those teachers there. So then we've got some curriculum adjustments. And then one of the areas where inflation has had a significant impact is, of course, in our operations and maintenance area. So we've got a $158,000 increase in operations and maintenance. And the majority of that is in the utilities and garbage, so we've got about 200,000, and we've got some reductions there. So on the good news is insurance actually in our renewal is attained basically a flat renewal. So we made a small adjustment to what we had in the budget there. So that's actually a decrease of 100,000. That's a first in a long time. So that counteracts a bit of the increase in utilities, but overall we see an increase of 160,000. Just some small adjustments there again. The vandalism maintenance to our playgrounds. We always have some expenditures of vandalism, and we've had to bump that up over the years. We seem to get a bit more of all of that. So it's not a large number in the scale of things, but we've made a small adjustment there. We're trying to do some different approaches there over the summer to minimize that as well. The next significant item is transportation, which that one is of note. This one has been going up there in terms of inflation over the last 2 years, including this year. We've alone increased it by 16%. So on renewal of our new contract, our rates had gone up by 10%. And this current year that we're under, that was another 6% increase due to inflation, which is built into our contract, the contract wording that allows for that. So 16% alone. And with discussions with our transportation contractor, we're anticipating 3.5% for this next year. So that plus a small change in the software costs that we're utilizing to track our transportation network is an increase of 232,000 in this area. Pause before I move to the next area.
On that transportation, and I don't know if you don't have it, that's fine. Do you know how close we are to matching the
grant we get for transportation?
Under the current structure, it's fairly close. I would say we have had small surpluses running kind of not too far from break even on transportation. The question will be what it looks like, what's the new eligibility. But for the current budget here, we're still sitting under the current framework because the government did delay the mandatory implementation of the new eligibility requirements to September 2025. And that's when our division will be implementing those new eligibility requirements, which will expand our capacity by 30%. And we'll have to see what the economics of that looks like once we budget for next year.
Our expectation is, because the transportation grant is a targeted grant, if you run a surplus, you can't reallocate that money to elsewhere in your budget. You may retain that surplus only for future years use with respect to transportation. And Associate Superintendent Gandon said we've run a small surplus for a couple of years. We're expecting that the deficit that we're running this year, or projecting rather for next year, will be covered off we'll eat up that surplus. And as we prepare for the following year, when we implement the new rules, we will be we're starting from scratch.
So to be clear, this current budget, it's a deficit for transportation?
No.
No? It's about even.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then rounding out the changes to expenditures, information technology is another area we've experienced inflationary impact when it comes to software licensing and leasing costs. So we've got additional leasing to add more computers, laptops for all the staff that's included in the budget. And then of course, increases to software. Software, we've been seeing 4 to 5% annual increases to licensing costs since it's used to be around 2-3%, and that's kind of crept up to 4 or 5% now that we see. And we've pushed back on providers, and we say that's our cost, and it's take it or leave it kind of. You have software, you have to pay. So a couple $100,000 in information technology increase, and then some smaller increases in HR. We've got a line for recruiting costs, and then a small adjustment again, an inflationary adjustment to the board social event, an increase of $5,000 in the budget included for next year. And then rounding out, we've got just some changes to the expenditures to addictions, mental health programs. So the revenue is going down, so the expenditures are going down. Same thing with the curriculum implementation, so that's counteracting. So there's about a $500,000 or $500,000 decrease in those areas, rounding up the changes to the budget. So that rounds out an increase of $5 million to the budget as compared to the budget this year when it comes to expenditures. On those expenses that we went through there, those are recurring expenses. So they're basically employment contracts, inflationary impact. So those are costs that will go continue forward through the future years. This list of expenditures here are part of the financial planning that's been done in the division for the last couple of years, in looking at where we want to target some of the accumulated surplus from operations. So that we've got about $1.7 million of what we call project expenses, which means they're limited time frames. So they're either 1 or 2 year projects that are planned to come off of our expenditures in the future years. So of the 1.7, only 400,000 of those are actually new. Other ones are carried over from prior year planning. So the significant ones that I want to mention here is, again, information technology. We have some schools where the infrastructure when it comes to wiring and for data is getting really aged, and we'll have to replace those. So we've got a 4-year project lined up with the information technology team to replace the wiring of those schools. So we spread that out over 4 years. So that's one significant one I wanted to highlight. And then the other one I want to highlight is the intervention programming that started with the government funding back in 2020 and 21 when it came to dealing with the impacts of COVID to student learning. So we've continued the staffing and the programming that we've provided as part of that, and been funding it in recent years, last couple of years, through surplus from operations because the funding has tapered off from the government in that regard. So we get a little bit, but not anything significant compared to the commitment the division has made to supporting those students. The item here lists 2 certificated teachers and 19 educational assistants for a total of roughly $900,000. So that's included in the budget for next year for that program. So that's what I wanted to highlight on these particular items, unless there's any other specific questions when it comes to these before I move on.
I don't have a question, but a comment that I was happy to see the intervention money still in the budget, and I understand that it's part of the reason for a deficit, but like from what I've heard in meetings and listening to staff talk about the success they're having, I'm glad that the priority from administration was to keep it in this funding this year. So thank you for that.
I'll move on. So here we see the enrollment projection for spring budget, for the next school year, and also for the second and third school year, so the 25-26, and also the 26-27. So the 2 key points here is to highlight is at the very bottom of the green table, we see 3.1% was the enrollment increase projected for next year, and we continue that outlook for the 25-26 school year, and then tapering off to 0.3% in year 25-26. So that is so we roughly about 9,400 students by the conclusion of 26-27. So what I've highlighted in yellow at the bottom is the increase in classroom staff. So the very top line in that orange section for the budget next year, we've got essentially 401 full-time equivalent classroom teachers, and you can see that with the projected growth in year 2 and 3, that grows to 412 by the 2026-2027 school year. That's maintaining our 22.7 ratio of students per certificated teachers. And then of course, the last line is showing the increase on a yearly basis of teachers from the year to year. So you can see the 18 that I referred to earlier, the 17.9, that's the increase from the current year for next year. So this is what I referred to earlier. I know the bottom numbers are really small, but the key is the trends in the graph. So this really illustrates graphically the focus and the results of the board's guiding principles of saying to the administration, we need to focus our money on the classrooms. So what you're looking at here is certificated staff broken into those 3 categories that I referred to earlier. So the green line is somebody with a teaching certificate that's working likely at the division level, a central office. And then you've got the yellow line, the top line, which is the, again, teachers, but they're based in schools, but not in classrooms. So you got your administrative staff and other certificated individuals who are working with the entire school population. And then the orange line is the teachers sitting in the classrooms working one-on-one with students. So you can see as our enrollment has increased, and you'll see this on a further slide, is that the substantial increase in teachers in the classroom. So the solid line is actuals dating back to 2016 and 17, around 359, to the 401 budgeted for next year, and then projecting to 410 and then 412 in the subsequent 2 years that we show for information. So you can really see the money invested in the classrooms from the various budgets from year to year. So in year 25-26 and 26-27, you see a slight decrease in the green line from 20 to 18. Going back to your comment, Chair Nellis, the intervention program is in the budget for next year, but in the 3-year plan, it falls off in year 2, and then it stays off in year 3, and you'll see what those numbers look like, but not necessarily saying that that program is not going to be revisited and looked at and what could be done in year 2, but that's what was originally contemplated in the plan, and that's going to have to be be reevaluated in light of what the numbers look like in the fall when the budget cycle continues for the following year. And I preface that because of the deficit positions you'll see once we look at the 3-year plan.
Now, just point out that, the intervention grant is something that we've received from Alberta Education for a few years. We've doubled our allocation to provide twice as much support as what we received in the grant. But as that tapers off, we don't have any plans at this point in time to continue it beyond next school year. But we will, of course, be watching for that opportunity because it is something we value greatly.
This is the same, sorry,
Just a quick question. I know the numbers are pretty rough that far out, but I was just curious, your enrollment projections going into like 26, 27, why they, I guess, drop off so sharply to almost nothing?
So the further you look out, so like you say, that it gets a little hazy and that my crystal ball kind of muddies up that far, but we have a 10-year projection that we work on, and we use a software called Veriger, which provides us some backing as to the stats for the city of Grand Prairie and area. And we utilize their kindergarten enrollment numbers and with some local adjustments. So at that point, the idea there is the provincial government is really pushing the Come to Alberta theme at the moment. So we're kind of predicting that will continue for a few years, the impact of that, and we'll see, I guess, what comes up this fall. But at that certain point, these are unprecedented numbers, the amount of immigration coming into, net migration into the province. So we thought it was a bit aggressive to continue and assume that trend was going to continue indefinitely. So that there is something that we've factored into the numbers. Also, considering that the birth rates in Grand Prairie have been going down in the last number of years, so that will have a downward pressure. So counteracting that would temper that growth that we would see and what we saw in the last couple of years, and then what we forecast for the next couple of years.
And that coupled with just a general kind of inclination to, as we extend further out, to increase how conservative we are, just to support our ability to react.
If you carry forward, look further, I don't have it on here, but it actually does. The increases go up to about 1.2% after that. It seems to be there's that 1 year there, and actually that kind of mirrors the information that we get from Alberta Education as well too, because when we were doing the capital planning, they provided us some of the high school numbers that they were showing, and they show a dip in that year as well too, which is just based on how the student population is rolling through. That seems to be something with that year that is accounting for that slight reduced increase in re-enrollment for that year. So that seems to be consistent there in the numbers that we see from the province.
Thank you.
And that aligns as well with the actual business plan for Alberta Education. When they released the provincial budget, they had growth in the provincial enrollment growth numbers, and they showed almost identical to what we're showing here, which was 2 to 3% increases in enrollment, tapering down to the third year in your business plan. There was very little increase in funding for enrollment growth because they were anticipating not a lot of enrollment growth for some reason. Interesting. So this slide here is the same concept, except this is with the support staff, so non-certificated staff. So we've got 2 categories here, which the blue line is strictly classroom-based educational assistants and staff. And then we've got the orange line, which is all the other support staff working throughout the division. So you got your custodial staff, staff like myself here at the division who works at the central office with no teaching certificate. So that's the distinction there. So again, similar idea as the certificate staff, we see the significant increase as our enrollment has increased. So the division continuing their commitment to providing the supports as we grow in the classrooms. We provide the additional staff in the classrooms as well. Now, of course, again, being consistent, the dip that you see in year 2 and 3 is 19 educational assistants that are part of the intervention program. Those are not in the budget and the projection for year 2 and 3, so that's why you see the reduction. So what do all those changes mean on a high level? So going back to the same idea as what I started with is the recap from the 3-year plan from the fall and November 2023 budget update. What we are projecting for or budgeting for next year is a planned deficit of $4 million. So that's roughly $973,000 higher than what the plan was in November of 2023. So that's to continue the current level of supports that we have along the goal of utilizing the operating accumulated surplus from operations as planned to get underneath the limits imposed by the government. Now, the difference here with this update from the fall is we achieve actually that limit at the end of the next school year for 2 reasons. First, the deficit's a little larger than what was the original plan from November. And second, if you recall, when the provincial budget was released in February, they actually upped the limit from 3.2% to 6%. So in this regards here, you'll see it on the next slide, we're under that limit by the end of the next school year. And then with this is not necessarily what the division wants to accomplish in year 2 and 3. This is a continuation of our current cost structure. So with our current cost structure, and you see the gray line I've highlighted there, that's where the project costs start coming off. So you see our project cost from the previous slide is sitting there at 1.7 million in next year's budget. That drops to 300,000 in year 2 and drops to 100,000 in year 3. That's the continuation of the projects that are planned to continue, which was some IT, but the large ones like the intervention program, that's where you see them falling off in year 2 and 3. So even with those project costs coming off, we're projecting a deficit of $2.5 to $2.6 million in year 2 and 3. So what does this mean in regards to, actually, I'll address that, what that looks like in terms of their accumulated surplus. So I'll just leave it at that for this slide and then just pause, see if there's any questions. So the information shown here in terms of year 2 and 3, I anticipate already the increases in staffing for certificated classroom teachers. When it comes to enrollment growth, as you saw, year 2 was 3%. So we've got another, I believe, 9 teachers for the additional $1 million. And then we've got an additional 2 teachers in year 2 for that smaller growth. So another 200,000. So that's already incorporated in here. And then some inflationary items have been accounted for in here as well. When it comes to staffing costs, when it comes to the group health plan, there's a number included in here as an estimate for that increase as well. So there is inflationary increases in here. So what this really indicates is what I referred to earlier, is that inflationary pressures are catching up with the division, and for that matter, for all the province when it comes to education, spending on education, based on the current rates the grants are sitting at. So of course, we don't know what the government's going to do in future years, but status quo, based on today's numbers, just carrying that forward, this is what the division would be faced with in year 2 and 3 after next year. So I think there was, this goes back to your question, Trustee Martin, is that, you know, the government in terms of increasing to fund inflation. And there's been a lot of talk after the provincial budget from the ATA and various other sources from some information that Statistics Canada had provided. The most current information was going up to 2021. So those numbers that were quoted were actually numbers from 2021. So I've used those numbers here, and what you see in front of you here are three things. So the blue line is our enrollment. So enrollment going back to 2017-18 school year all the way to our projected of 26-27. So you can see the dip during COVID when parents were homeschooling their students, or they registered with divisions who had home online learning. So you saw our dip. We dipped to about 7,900 students, and then we've been increasing steadily since then. I've noted on the right-hand side, we've increased by 15% from the 2021 student COVID low in regards to the budget for the enrollment for next year. And then looking back actually to where we were at prior to that dip in COVID, we've increased roughly 7.8% in students from our prior, we were at 8,400 students. So we're projected to be at just short of 9,100 for next year. So that's a 7.8% increase from those pre-COVID years. So that's the enrollment number. The green line is using our figures is the revenue received from the government per student, and this is operational revenue. I want to make to note. So I tried to go back and look at what they were looking at in regards to Stats Canada figures, and I could determine that they were looking at operational revenue because there's a bit more to it than just looking at that. There's a bit different other numbers, but I could come to that as close as possible because they said in Alberta in 2021 the government funded by 11,600 per student. So using our numbers, it's fairly close. I'm going from our audited statements, which again, there's some accounting adjustments that could be different. They're likely looking at the government budget when they're looking at those numbers and saying they did like $9 billion divided by provincial numbers. So pretty close. So that's where we were at in 2021 versus the Canadian average of 13,300 per student. So I've used the same metric for all the years. So we've got the historical. So we were at a low of 10,700 in 2017 to 2018.
That's where that yellow box is on the.
No, the yellow, that's the very first one. The yellow box there, that's just to highlight that I've actually normalized that number because if you recall in 2019, 2020, when everything came to a grinding halt in March of 2020, they initially said they were going to continue funding us, and then they didn't, and they cut our funding. So our actual funding was much lower, but I used our budgeted the number for that year just to normalize that because that dropped significantly if we just based it on actual funding.
Gotcha, thank you.
So then we can see that it crept up during the COVID years because they were holding the boards harmless, even though our enrollment numbers had dropped. So you can see it peaked to about 11,500 per student in 21-22. And now you can see what I'm referring to as inflationary pressures again is that as our growth is occurring, the funding is starting to trail. So that compounded with inflationary cost increases is why you're seeing these deficit numbers really coming out in year 2 and 3 because it's starting to trail and trail significantly based on the current funding structure that the government's providing. So the orange dot at the top there that's that 13,300 in 2021. That was the average across Canada. The high was I can't remember which province. One province that's 15,000 and change. I can't remember. Do you recall which one that was? So that's using
eastern provinces.
Yeah. So I wanted to highlight that and bring to the board's attention because this shows the two different opposing forces working against each other is per student funding is going down, inflation is going up, and we're being squeezed by two sides when it comes to our operations.
That's an incredible slide.
Impactful.
And actually drops under 11,000 by 26, 27. If the current structure continues, we're at 10,900 per student. So what does that look like when it comes to our accumulated surplus from operations? So as I said earlier, we do dip underneath the limit once the limits change to 6%. So I've highlighted there 4.8 million is what our projected accumulated surplus would be. And I highlight here that you see under the 23-24, there's $1 million in red. That's a projection of where we think we might end up this year in regards to our results. I know we budgeted 2.3, and in past updates, I've said our deficit would likely be a little smaller this year from what we had budgeted. So that's anticipating that a little bit. So there's some foresight in that regards to that number. So that's getting us to that 4.8. Now, utilizing the 2.5 and the $2.6 million surplus, deficits projected in 25, 26, and 26, 27, you can see that the very last number is in red by 106,000. If we change nothing, and if and the government changes nothing, we would deplete all our accumulated surpluses by the end of the third year. So of course, that's not the plan. We know that's not what we do, but this is just showing the projection based on today's numbers. So that's the work that the administration team is going to do this coming fall is looking at, what particular approach needs to happen to address those particular year 2 and 3 if the government makes no changes on how it funds on a per student level. So that's information that the administration takes aside and does some planning, pre-planning for scenarios to make sure that we're ready for budget 25, 26 when that time comes, and we know what the government's funding levels are going to be. So I've highlighted graphically there on the right, and I've made comments to it. Essentially now the shift is, we've had a 3-year plan to use effectively our surplus for targeted supports for our students, to shifting now that we've got to change our cost structure potentially if the funding doesn't change, with a target of maintaining our cumulative surplus at around that $5 million mark, which is as a reasonable level for a division of an operational budget of $115 million. It's roughly 4.2%, I believe it works out to 4.1%, which I have there. So that's something that probably where we should start maintaining that. So as if we continue the way we are, so you can see the green kind of going down to 0, but showing the target we want to stay at 5 million. So the structure has to change where we maintain that, which means we need to target a balanced budget in 25, 26, and 26, 27 would be the target, is to balance in those years. So it would be a matter of seeing what additional funding comes from the government in conjunction with if there's any kind of structural changes needed to our cost structure in terms of what programming is offered, staffing levels, and so forth. So there's going to be a 2-pronged approach to get to a balanced budget at that point.
Questions for Norm on that, or Associate Superintendent Gallon on that? I have one. With that ASO shrinking, and then the planning, according to this budget, of using around half of it next year, and with no indication, I guess, of the province doing anything with inflation, I'm wondering if administration was unanimous with this budget's kind of ability to balance spending on today's students and saving for the other students.
This current budget for the 24-25 school year?
Yeah, that the approach, this was a culmination of discussions throughout the last three months or so in regards to it's an approach where, as you've seen in the last budget years, taking a very conservative approach has resulted in some accumulation of accumulated surplus, and we felt that we needed to reverse course a little bit on that and not take such a conservative approach. And we feel this is a balanced approach where we see what's coming, and so there's time to adjust for that. And in light of not doing a large wholesale change for this coming year, it's something that felt that we had time to adjust for year 2 and 3, and also still meet the original target, which we do have to bring our cumulative surplus down, because provincially that's been a goal and target. And
remains,
yeah.
So they've just changed the limit.
Yeah. So that's something that we considered all of that and looked at possibly making some reductions for next year, but felt that it would be which word I'm looking for? Premature is the word I'm looking for. It'd be premature to do that at this stage without seeing what the government will do for funding this coming year. And then obviously with the provincial budget, and everything will come out in February, but it would be premature to start reducing positions at this point, considering the position we are in with our accumulated surplus. I think it would send the wrong message in what our priorities are in regards to the resources that we have that we can allocate to our students today.
Yeah, I'd echo those sentiments. Unanimous senior administration, all of from the directors up through the associate and deputy superintendents and myself, unanimous in that the 3-year plan that we built is the plan we need to continue with at this point in time for all those reasons. When you see that second year of the new rolling 3-year plan with that $2.5 million, the first $2.5 million deficit, and really taking us down by half, we're also unanimous that that cannot be our plan for that year. So Associate Superintendent Gandal talked about an exercise that we're going to engage in beginning this spring, but really the heavy lifting will be done by someone else next.
Well done. Well done.
Next fall, where we're gonna look to see what $2 million in reductions would look like. And there's a couple reasons for all of that. We're, you know, our budget does not exist on its own. It exists within the context of the larger provincial government public sector expenditures, right? And we know that provincially, the provincial budget this year is for a planned surplus. We know that there is the impact of the education budget that we're seeing across the, starting to hear from other divisions as they're engaged in a process of following the similar timelines we are. We're starting to hear that the impact on other divisions is similar, but also is greater in those divisions that don't have the ability to absorb it through reserves. And so the cuts and the pain that is felt by really the declining per student FTE, honestly, largely the declining per student FTE is something that we feel is potentially something that could be addressed in the next budget cycle by Alberta Education. We're not sure though, so we're going to plan to do it on our own. And then if the budget announcement comes out with something better, then we'll respond then. And we think we're in a position of relative strength to make good decisions for our students at that point in time.
I actually really appreciated Associate Superintendent Gandon's presentation. It just gets clearer and clearer all the time. Not that I necessarily like sort of the news, but we're also bound by an election that will be coming sort of in.
Yeah, well, there's the municipal elections that year.
Yeah, and then following that will be provincial elections. So those are all these variables that we sort of can't predict. But what we can predict, or what I sort of think when I think about our advocacy priorities, it speaks to me as to why we'll need to continue sort of a priority around predictable, sustainable funding. That's it.
I didn't highlight it during the presentation, but in the report, I think I noted it is like just all the little things that add up, like for something simple such as our funding for our internet access, they call it the SuperNet. That grant has been, I've been now with the division almost 7 years, and that grant's been 192,000 since that point for us, and our costs are like 122,000 more than that's like 314,000. So that doesn't even cover our SuperNet costs, and it's a grant specific for that and doesn't even cover it.
Any other questions?
Observation, I think, part of the next phase of our analysis of this over the next year is going to be less about what's the impact on our budgets and that sort of thing. And not to take away from the fact that the impact on our budgets is an impact on classrooms, but also perhaps to put it in the context of what is expected to be the impact on our parents. We're going to be looking at school fees, and there's not lots of big changes we see in those fees this year, but there could be down the road, particularly as we've already talked transportation. We're expecting some pretty significant increases in there for 25, 26. And just in general, the inflationary pressures we feel, we know our families feel as well. And I don't know how to buffer them from that with our budgets.
That's fine. Do you want to close on that at all?
I know.
I think there's some positives or some upside that could happen. I did summarize that, I believe, in the end of my report that, this is based on those enrollment projections. We have grown by 4.7% over the last, each year over the last 2 years, and we only have we have 3% in there. So there is an upside that if we may exceed those enrollment projections. that picture changes and improves. And especially, I know you may have had a comment to that, Trustee Johnson, about the third year, 0.3%. That's basically saying there's no growth. So that's fairly conservative. So if we have, 2% growth there, or even 3% growth, that changes those numbers. So that makes the exercise a little easier. And then also, to counteract that, I did mention about some risks as well there too. So this is based on the assumptions that are highlighted in the report, and there's things that can change, and they could change that picture quite quickly. On that, that's pretty much all I want to say.
Fair enough. So this is going to be coming back to us May 28th, and it needs to be approved by the end of May, trustees. So now is the time to probe with any questions or anything like that they need to take away and workshop.
We'll be asking for a resolution at that May 28th meeting to accept and adopt the 24-25 budget.
Perfect. Oh, Mr. Johnson.
Sorry.
I missed you.
That's okay, I just raised it. I'm trying to put it into words what's in my head. Correct me if I'm wrong, you just indicated that if our enrollment projections, like if enrollment in future years is greater than what it is now, that it would put us in a stronger position. But your slide showed a decreasing trend in funding per student, is that correct? So naively, I would expect that if we're getting less money per student, then increasing enrollment beyond the projection would put us in a worse position.
It would give us more funding, and we would have more flexibility to make decisions to where we want to allocate that, and also that deficit likely potentially could be less than that 2.6 that I show in the third year, depending on how much of that enrollment increase would be. It is a decreasing probability, like you say, with year over year, but I'm using the actual grants rates from today to those numbers. So what you're seeing there also is inflation impact. So that makes sense. But yeah, it would still improve that position.
All right. Back to you.
All right, so next up, we've got the conclusion of our process to change school fees for the 24-25 school year. In your package, the first 2 pages is showing the school fees that are changing from the schools who submitted and went through the process with their school community in regards to proposed changes as per our policy. So we've got a list of from a few schools there. So like Superintendent McDonald mentioned, there's not a lot of changes, but there are a few changes. The biggest one there to note is under the Composite High School is some introductory fees for the IB program. We've been we're probably one of very few schools who offer the IB program that had no fees associated with the program at all. And of course, with everything going up in terms of costs and so forth, it was decided that we had to go with the group and start instituting fees for the program to support that program. So we've got three fees put in place there. So there's a lot of discussions and thought put to this from the principal and staff at the central office in terms of doing some research on what's done across the province and when it comes to this program and so forth. And the principal Boveda looked at all that information and made the recommendation to the board of these 3 fees here: a $300 course fee for a student who enrolls in the program, and then a small exam fee and some material fees in that regard. So, and then this also makes a commitment from the family and the students that once they enroll in here, that they pursue it because they've got that investment in the program and not just drop out because it's, there's no incentive, financial incentive in that regards if they change their mind and so forth. So and of course there's costs with this program. We have to pay exam fees for the oversight body that overlooks the program and such. So, and of course, we pay fees for the exam. So the small exam fee there is nowhere near what we pay for exam fees. So it's just get a commitment from the student and the family for going through that program. So that was the one that I really wanted to highlight there. Other than
The addition of those fees still does not cover the costs of being enrolled, right? And so it is the increase in enrollment for students who come to enroll in the program that is where we balance that out.
Just John?
Yeah, sorry. Just from my understanding, the $300 that you've got indicated there, you say it's a course fee. Is that per IB course, or
no, that's the program, I believe. So if they enroll to IB, it's $300 to get all the courses. It's not per course. No.
But what if they're only taking one course? Same fee?
I believe so.
Let's do that.
So, everything else has gone up by, $20 to $300. Why not the composite, the computer science, computer fundamentals, and also drama, theater, 10, 20, 30?
Why'd they go down?
No, they changed, they stayed the same, they didn't go up at
No,
all.
they went to zero.
They went to zero.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, the options are being eliminated. There's probably
Okay.
not enough enrollment, so they probably eliminated the options.
Just Mark.
I don't believe the drama theater is being eliminated.
No, must be another reason for it.
I think it might just be related to the new school, the resource of them having the theater.
Just Martin?
I'm not sure, like, just to understand the international student fee stuff. So what constitutes an international student?
Someone from outside of Canada.
Well, we have like these road exchange students coming.
No, they're covered under an Alberta Education Agreement.
And then when it talks about other province stuff, that's for Indigenous, that's.
Federal funding is, with Indigenous, there's different rules there as well. The international school students are students from foreign countries who come to live with family to get a Canadian education.
Okay.
And we have single digit numbers of
Yeah, I
international
can't see the
students.
big amount because they're, I don't see a big university, not nice.
Superintendent, the one that is wondering me is that IB course fee of $300. I see the advantage of students being able to take one of those courses, should they choose, if they excel in math and want to do the math IB program. And I wonder if $300 for one program, and I know quite a few of them do one program. Hold on, I should maybe disclaim that my daughter is in the IB program, but I have no problem paying the $300. But because she's in that program, I know that a lot of the kids take separate courses, and I wonder if that fee might prohibit them from doing so because.
I'll have further discussions with Mr. Hobeda. I'll inquire to see if that there's a distinction between a student that takes a IB course versus a student that's going through the IB channel. I'll get that clarification. And the other point that I haven't mentioned is existing students are grandfathered. So if they're currently in the program, it's only newly enrolled students through the IB program that will be paying these fees. So if somebody's in grade 11 and halfway through taking these courses, they would not be paying these fees. They're grandfathered in because that would not be.
I worry about it because I know we've talked in the past that as students go through the International Baccalaureate program, they start dwindling because it gets really hard and the exams are a lot. And I would hate to see them dwindle more because of a prohibitive fee like that if it was only for one course and not if you were taking all the full slate of courses.
Where we landed on these is once we compared it to the other offerings across the province and what was being charged, it was on the lighter side. It was still quite more economical than what a lot of the other schools. So we thought it was a happy medium to start from having no fees whatsoever to not being at the top of the pile and charging the most expensive fee. So it's quite low because some structures already charge per course, and they were not just $25 charges. They were like hundreds of dollars for just one course.
Yeah, I can appreciate.
So we said, well, let's just do 300 for the entire program. So that would be something that's more palatable and more, being able to be covered by parents.
Would it be possible to table this and get more information about the specifics of that? Before asking the trustees to approve that fee schedule for tonight, we could extend it to the next meeting and bring it back.
Yeah, we can provide which information I compared.
Specific about the additional information that we're seeking clarity about the International Baccalaureate fees.
We have more time, yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. Any other questions about the student fee schedule or?
Foreshadowing for next meeting.
Yeah, for associate superintendent.
I guess one, for me, it comes down to all the student fees, and I understand we want to keep them down and stuff, but I also want to keep it, I don't know, like, I guess fair across the board. Or we're not subsidizing programs for the certain ones that pick it, and the others are pulling from somewhere else to subsidize this for a certain few. Most of these, are they all designed just kind of as cost recovery?
Yeah, that has to be the way they're set up as cost recovery. So
If we collect fee and don't spend it, it's to be rebated back.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Which we don't do.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent General. All right, how's everyone feeling? Do we need a quick 5-minute break or are we good to press on? Press on? Heard it. Okay. Then we're going to start with the Alberta School Boards Association Zone 1 meeting. Trustee Cook, you'll report on that.
Right.
Happily you were able to go.
Yeah, so I was happy to represent our division on May 8th for the in-person only meeting in Fort Vermilion. And there was 21 attendees from our 9 divisions or districts that represent Zone 1. I would just like to start by continuing the conversation, I guess, related to budget. So there was a discussion about ASBA Zone 1 fees in particular, and there were 3 scenarios that were sort of presented as sort of potential sort of scenario increases, and so you will be receiving that when the minutes come. But essentially, the discussion, which was not in camera, but there was sort of a discussion around sort of, once again, sort of increasing costs around Edwin Parr, Friends of Education, meeting travel, some of the ad hoc meetings that are becoming sort of more formalized. So just leave that sort of with you with more information to come. Would also like to tell you a little bit about the Alberta Education Update, and that was provided to us virtually by Ron Taylor. And a lot of his focus was actually around addressing some of the surveys and whatnot that have been happening around with the government. And so he talked about the cell phone survey, and many of you might have heard this sort of already, but in the first week alone, there were over 40,000 responses. That survey has now sort of been closed, and so we are awaiting sort of what the results might be and what the potential decision that the government sort of might make. The other thing I wanted to note was I had been asked to provide feedback that was received, I think, via the Parent Council regarding a request for the opportunity to have open-ended comment boxes, particularly related to the APOR survey for grades 4, 7, and 10. So I did give that feedback, and I would tell you that the feedback I received back was that was something that has never ever been requested by any division in the province. It's not been heard of before, but that the feedback would certainly be be given. So I think that was good news. ASBA reports, President Merrill and Vice President Bazook, Dr. Abood, and certainly our Director Tammy Hancock provided sort of reports to us, all with, I think, some theme that would suggest to me that there's like a really sort of increasing and excellent sort of rapport, with government. I would tell you that it was also noted that the Honoring Spirit Awards were held in April 15th for the recipients, and Chair Nellis had attended, and so that was certainly something that was highlighted at our zone meeting. Also conversation around the Youth Council panel, and also ASBA has certainly provided some correspondence to the Alberta government around just a statement sort of supporting, not on content, but supporting, appreciation around the curriculum. The other news I would tell you about was, I think we had some discussion at the last meeting around the submission for the FGM in fall of 2024 related to vaping, thank you. And so it was approved at the zone level, but I also wanted to just share with you that on March 21st, the federal government had a nicotine replacement document that they published, and then in follow-up, not necessarily to that, but AHS has also submitted a notice of intent to the government, which has not been publicly released, but that would also be addressing nicotine replacement, including vaping. So that is what happened there. The Northwest Consortium and Labor Relations and Professional Recruitment Committee, there were no reports. The next meeting will be held June 12th, and that will be hosted in St. Isidore.
Just on the ad hoc committees?
Yes.
What, so there's budget chart 1, budget chart 2,
Yes,
budget
yes.
chart 3. So what kind of ad hoc committees are you doing?
They were talking about the per diems for the health professionals one, the bylaw one. I think we thought that the Northwest Regional Consortium was covered. We didn't think that there would be any per diems required there, but certainly for bylaw ad hoc and health professionals, those were the per diems that were being requested. And then again, just because of, cost of expenses, and for the Edmund Parr banquet, and also for some of the travel related to the Friends of Education, those were all expenses that were increased.
Do you think they'll break those down, the ad hoc committee ones?
Um,
Like one is 13,000, one is 19,000, and one is
It probably did at the meeting.
15,000.
Yeah, they did, and I think
Yeah.
by consensus, we were going more with the draft 3. So looking at the expenses related to more, not the, like if you look at the overall, if you're looking at the document.
Not have that.
Okay, well, it would be more around 50,000, not the total 54,000 or the total 40, maybe more the 47,000 one.
And that's being passed in June
Yes.
in St. Isidore.
So the 47,000 one?
Yes,
Then-
yeah,
Okay, so
that was the thinking, but that was.
chart number 1.
Yeah. Yes, chart number 1, yeah.
Any questions for Trustee Cook? Just a point of clarification, I actually was not at that event.
Oh, you weren't?
No, because our student couldn't attend.
Oh.
So we're doing it here.
Okay, well, thanks for that, because I thought, well, that's interesting that
Yeah.
Justine Ellis attended.
No, I
But it
was
was just
invited,
that-
but
oh, okay.
because our student
Okay.
couldn't go, I
Okay.
didn't.
Okay, sorry about that. President Marilyn said it, and I thought, so I wrote it down. I thought, I didn't know she attended
No,
that.
I did.
You also-
He was gonna be a smart aleck. We'll
Okay,
move on.
okay.
Thank you, Trustee Cook. Spring General Meeting Budget Bulletin. I talked to you guys about that when we were talking about advocacy and engagement, so I have nothing else to add to that. We can move on to the professional development event, preserving choice for parents. Okay,
Surprise.
so this was yesterday. Superintendent McDonald and I attended. was something that had nothing to do with preserving choice for parents.
No, it's fair to say, absolutely not.
Nothing to do about that. But we did attend a very long overview on the Constitution and the power divides between different levels of government put on by a couple of lawyers from McLennan and Ross.
Glenn Ross.
McLennan and Ross.
I'm going to submit for 3 graduates.
Yes, no, we both get some university credit for having to sit through that. After a very long overview, they then talked about Bill 18 and some of the implications of that. School boards are subject to Bill 18, as we kind of heard. The details of what that looks like are going to be in the regulations, so they don't have anything to comment on that yet. They talked about funding from the Government of Canada, and according to Bill 18, the school boards, as we know, will have to plan and apply to get approval from the Government of Alberta for any funding that we get from the Government of Canada. How that approval will work will be in the regulations. We don't know. The understanding is that the Premier's office is leading this bill, not one of the ministers, and Alberta School Boards Association is working to get an answer on if Jordan's principle applies or not. And so far, they have not been able to get a firm answer on that.
That's the biggest concern we have. Jordan's principal funding exists as the result of an adjudicated human rights complaint at the federal level, right? And so it was a settlement that came about from the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It said, thou shalt provide this funding. We're not, at this point in time, we don't see any reason to be concerned about that. Based on the information we have now. But as I reflect on the constitutional lecture we had the privilege to attend yesterday, I think it illustrates the growing divide that exists between, like with respect to authority and decision making, right? And it's probably not a bad idea to have an understanding that, there are some decisions that are in the provinces that are the provincial provinces authority, and some that are federal, and that's the nature of our democracy in Canada. And clarity about that might help us accept some of the decisions that could be made in the future. Might provide background information to protest some.
You know what, Superintendent McDonald, that's a great point. And all of you guys should watch the recording of this.
It's recorded.
ASBA recorded it, so you can go onto the Learning Center and get your history lesson.
Section 91 of the British North America Act identifies the federal powers. Section 92, the provincial powers, and Section 93, the
There's going to be a test
that's
that's
education specific.
Okay.
And that's from a math teacher.
Yeah. We had a review.
That's how good.
Any questions on that? What you guys get to
Well, I
watch?
missed it.
Yeah. There was no speaker's corner.
Which is the bright side from
Yeah,
yesterday.
which gave me a bit of a pound a couple hours last night. That was great. So moving on to the committee reports, Council of School Council meetings. So our board met with the Council of School Council last week for our final meeting of the year. The minutes are attached for information, but it was a good meeting with representatives from most of our schools.
I think 13.
15 out of 18, which was great. We obviously, the board appreciates all board chairs who were able to make that meeting and those who are back at their home boards. And we just value their opinions and the value that they bring to each of our school communities. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about that.
There's a reference in the minutes to Superintendent McDonald sharing a resource with school council chairs about purpose of the school councils and the role of the chair. So I've got those ready, and I expect to have them out before the end of this week, just to kind of, along with the recommendation, book your workshops for September now, right? And they will book them in and have them set and have everybody ready to get up and running early in the year.
Then So student advisory, Travis, you're reporting on that?
Yeah, sure. So that was held May 7th, and it was at Isabel Campbell School. There were 15 students, and Trustee Martin, myself, and Superintendent McDonald, he led the morning. Yeah, following sort of the land acknowledgement, I think one of the big focus was on wellness and actually follow up sort of with the students around the division assurance survey results. So students had been charged with going back to their respective schools, talking to their principals about their results, and then we did sort of some sort of table sort of talk, you know, about sort of the questions and the results and some of the things that you know, teachers talk to, or that students talk to the principal about. So, you know, for example, question 20 on is like, my teacher cares about me. Like in some schools, it was like, you know, very high. And so the students, it was really quite provocative because they would talk about, you know, the results and, you know, why that was. And some of the suggestions that there were around, you know, how to keep some of the results sort of where they were at, or how to improve some of the results. So that was really, I think, great sort of, you know, conversation. Already has been mentioned that the students will be coming on Tuesday, May 28th to the board meeting. And so there was certainly a good amount of preparation for, you know, the presentation and I'm not going to steal their thunder, but certainly around what they'll be presenting to us. So that was sort of great. The other sort of exercise that we did is we talked about cell phones in schools. And again, Superintendent McDonald, he sort of led them in a T-chart exercise. And it was really quite interesting because, again, students talked about, you know, the use of cell phones and the good, sort of the bad. And, you know, it doesn't matter how many conversations you have about cell phones, there's just doesn't seem to be a right or wrong answer. It's really quite a continuum in terms of where schools are at and where even the students' views around use of cell phones. And then I think the other thing that we had a fair bit of discussion around was our board advocacy priorities. And I think, again, Superintendent Dahl did a really good job of teasing out from the students sort of the priorities and some of the things that students think that we should be advocating for, such as ensuring there are enough resources, that there's enough space in schools, supporting new ways of learning, equity, and then, you know, great closure. The sweatshirts were there because we promised these students sweatshirts, so the sizing of the sweatshirts were there, and off they went to the Subway lunch.
Yeah. Pretty big sweatshirts. We might have to see if we can get the kids.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, a summary, excellent summary, Trustee Cook. Really
But they'll summarize it now too.
Yeah, that's good.
But I'll summarize what we heard from the kids. The same conversation could have been with their parents. Like, they get it. The things they care about, the issues they identify, they might use different words, but it's the same things that we talk about with staff and with parents. A pretty impressive group of students.
Looking forward to listening to them next time.
Sure is. It's really,
A lot of fun.
it is. Junior highs?
Well, it's, our
to
student
12.
advisory committee is grades 6 to 12.
Right.
And so we didn't have any of our 10, 11, grade 10, 11, or 12 students. Two grade 9s. Two grade 9s from the comp. High school students felt that they just couldn't miss class.
Yeah, no, I figured out there's one or there.
Yeah, so it does, there is some meat on the bone with respect to, that we could chew on with respect to planning for next year. You know, that we've tried, so our second year, we've tried a little bit of mixing it up during the school day, other sites, things like that. Curious to see, and that our June meeting will be focused on that, kind of wrapping it up and planning for next year. Not planning to recruit for next year, right? So we've got some momentum going through with, nobody will have to be brought up to speed. We'll see what happens. Great day, really great day.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah, anybody who couldn't make it lost out.
Yes, I'm right. Teacher trustee liaison committee, trustee Martin.
I attended kind of a review of the last few minutes, gave a board update on all the things that we're working on. And then essentially through the 3-year education plan, and they all talked about how it affected the planning that goes on for schools and from top down and how feedback they get to put into that and how it kind of mirrors the plan that we have as a division, right? So,
That was quite impressive.
yeah, it's our last meeting again of the year. It's interesting to hear their perspectives and how everything fits together, and we kind of, it was neat to get that feedback from them and hear their input. We recognized our Edmund Park nominee as she was at the meeting, which was nice, so that was cool to do that. And then that was last meeting of the year, so we had a meal as well, so we had to visit with the teachers as well.
Bonded over shawarma.
Anyone who missed that meeting missed out. At the Education Foundation, Trustee Martin again.
So we were meeting last week. We have a casino coming up on May
25th or
28th.
29th, something like that.
Yeah. There's a volunteer thing set out today, if you're 26th, 27th, Sunday and Monday. If you're available, or if you know people available, please share the sign up genius and get me some help. There's a lot of late night shifts that have been already taken up, but we need some during the day on the Sunday and the Monday. So if you're available or you know people that are, please pass that on. I pass on my 3 schools for board chairs, just to see if they can send with their parent group, just because I think that's not our avenue, and I know they are going to send out with retired teachers group as well, so that was the plan. And then we're just looking at what it looks like next year for our
Event for
Yeah.
our
Striving.
excellence, yeah.
just because of the cost of food and everything else. We're trying to figure out where's the value, what do we want, what do the students want, what the parents want. Maybe we re-image it, redesign what it is and how it looks, just because food costs are going, just like everything else, inflation is going quite high.
And as the division grows too.
It gets bigger and bigger and harder to find a place that can house everybody in a meal type setting. So we thought there's other options available. So we're just looking with, we've asked Chandra to go back to NTRAC Center to see if there's another option for maybe a full meal, some kind of a snack thing. And then we're also looking at Pomeroy and college, or 3 other places, to kind of look at different options. What can we do? Bring it back for next meeting to make a decision for next year. Whether we've changed, because it's kind of short notice, it's already kind of built for next year, we might just carry on with it and then look after the fact, but we'll see what she brings back for next meeting, so.
Fair enough.
That's their summary?
Yeah, that was very
Any
good.
questions?
I guess one of the other things.
No, you're good.
Actually, doesn't matter.
I'm totally
No, it
kidding.
actually doesn't matter. Okay, so
I was joking.
no, that's okay.
Okay, you don't want to talk about it? Okay. We have a letter of condolence that was attached to your package. We'll start with new issues or new ideas. Trustee Buzia?
Well, I just wanted to say a special thank you to the audience for coming today. I really appreciate it. And nice to see you again, Paula.
Very nice. Trustee Martin?
Not with this head.
Well, thanks for coming, Paula.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
I do have a question on the new issues. Part of the reason I came,
Oh, sorry, actually,
I can't
no, it's,
speak at all.
no, that's
Okay.
right.
So how
It's
do I
an
get in touch
observing.
with you?
You can speak to me after the meeting and we'll
Okay.
show you how to do that.
Perfect.
Trustee Johnson?
That's all I have.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done. I'm cutting both of you off today.
Sorry, is it me? Yeah. I'm sorry, I realized with my update with the advocacy meeting, virtually, that I had missed that in addition to potentially having a meeting with our MLAs to reach out to them and help educate them about some of the rising inflationary pressure that we're facing. We had also discussed sending a letter to the minister. So I didn't know if I should bring that up now as something that we would possibly want to look at, or if we would want to wait until after approving the budget.
I thought our discussion today was that we would talk about it as an action item after the budget, but
Sure, that makes sense. I just realized that I missed that in our discussion in there, so just maybe, yeah, put it on the radar.
actionize it, sure. Thanks for that. Trustee Cook?
Just new issue. This was follow-up from the High Prairie School Division, and it was noted at the Zone 1 meeting. They had asked that divisions be made aware of the closure of the youth treatment center in High Prairie. And the reason they wanted that sort of noted is that there actually had been a fire in November. But recently the decision, I think, has been made that it would remain closed for the foreseeable future. And so this treatment center is the only one north of Edmonton. So there's one in Edmonton, Lethbridge, and also in Laklavish. So they just asked, I think, that information be shared because it potentially sort of impacts any children that we would be, that would have the option to go to the site in High Prairie. So I'll just, there's just a couple of documents. They are headed by sort of AUP but it's just more sort of information. And then there's sort of a standard sort of letter. And so not trying to be political, just wanted to share that on behalf of High Prairie and share it for the minutes, if that's okay. And then just do with that as just for information. And then the other sort of new issue I just wanted to share was related to school council, and just wanted to share that the schools are very visibly developing their 3-year plans and are really sort of invested. And I think, as Superintendent Jonathan said earlier, he used the word sort of deeper, and that's how I would describe it too in terms of what I heard at school council. They are also very serious about submitting feedback regarding my advocacy priorities. And then the other thing I heard, at least at one of my school councils, was just some more interest in understanding Section 40 and sort of what that means. But those were just sort of the highlights.
Section 40 of the Education Act?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, all of you, for all the work you do.
And I didn't have anything for issues, new ideas, so looking around the table, I will adjourn this meeting at 8:30 p.m.